The presenting sponsor of Andrew Talks to Chefs is Muse. Muse is the chef-created recipe operating system that makes your professional kitchen life easier with unprecedented tools for recording, scaling, analyzing, costing, and teaching recipes. Much of it at the press of a virtual button. Learn more at getmeez.com/Andrew. That's GETMeez.com/Andrew. This episode of Andrew Talks to Chefs is supported in part by S.Pellegrino Sparkling Natural Mineral Water. For the past 125 years, S.Pellegrino has supported the art of fine dining in all of its ever-changing forms and nurtured the next generation of chefs through resources and mentorship. To learn more, visit sanpellegrino.com.
I'm Massimo Bottura.
This is Amanda Cohen.
This is David Kinch.
This is Mike Anthony.
This is Hooni Kim.
This is Amanda Freitag.
This is Richard Blaze.
This is Paul Kahn.
This is Curtis Stone.
This is Stephen Harris.
This is Missy Robbins.
And you're listening to Andrew Talks to Chefs.
Yeah, so I lived in New York, and then I went back to Detroit for a little while to kind of recollect after I dropped out of college. And I actually was working at my parents' hair salon, and my father fired me. And I walked to this restaurant next door. I asked to speak with the chef, and I said, "Are you hiring any dishwashers?" And he goes, "Yeah, we are." I said, "Okay, I'm ready to become a chef now." And I started washing dishes.
I just want to make sure I'm not over dramatizing this in my head. You went right from getting fired by your dad. You walked out that same few minutes and went to the restaurant.
It was a moment where I'm like, I need to do something with my life. And I've been contemplating it. I'm like, I can either become a hairdresser or I'm going to become a chef. My father fired me for good reason, for cause. I would have fired me as well. And I walked right into that restaurant, and I've been in kitchens ever since. So,
amazing.
He thought, I was talking to my father, and he's like, I thought you were going to come back in 3 days, and you haven't been back since. And so I never went back.
Well, that was a new way to start the show, right? Got right into the interview. It wasn't just a 10, 15-second clip. It was a little bit from the middle of the interview to wet your whistle, whet your appetite for the whole thing. We are going to go back to the beginning of that interview in just a moment. But first, I am your host, Andrew Friedman, here on the show Andrew Talks to Chefs. If you've recently discovered us on YouTube, I hope you're enjoying these episodes. I do want to remind everybody, we do have more than 300 audio episodes available wherever you get your audio-only podcasts, places like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, that kind of thing. But we are here now in both audio and video. And as I've been looking week to week, or as I should say, as my team and I have been looking week to week at the shows, we have been trying to think of ways that would streamline everything for both audio listeners and people who are now enjoying the show by video. And we've moved some of the ads that I usually read here during the intro to various points during the show to spread them out. I'm not going to do any dining notes here at the top of the show. Maybe we'll save those and do a periodic short special episode about that. So today it is just going to be our interview. And our subject today is Armond Joseph. And I have to say, I had not met Armond. To be totally honest, I wasn't familiar with him. But he is the chef, and he has been at the restaurant first as sous chef and now as the chef. Léon 1909, and that is on Shelter Island. That is out in Long Island. And it is a beautiful setting. It is a live fire restaurant. That's something we talked about a bit here over the last few years. This is one of the better live fire meals I've ever had. It was quite wonderful. I drove out there recently on a Saturday night. I made the trip to and from New York City. That was about 2.5 hours each way. And I have no regrets. This guy does some amazing stuff with live fire, not just super straightforward things, but also dishes. And you'll see some of these interspersed throughout the interview, photographs of these dishes, but dishes that would be right at home and restaurants that were not deemed live fire restaurants, very nicely, beautifully plated dishes, rather elegant, very sophisticated in their flavor and in the layering of flavors. The whole thing is just great. Armond is a fascinating guy, was going to be a poet at one point in his life, did some other things that I won't spoil here, eventually found his way to the kitchen, cooked around mainly New York, a little bit in Rhode Island at a pivotal restaurant. But right now, and for the last 5 years, his main thing has been live fire at Léon, 1909. I recommend this restaurant to you if you're in New York. It's kind of a fun drive out. It involves a quick little auto ferry ride of just a few minutes, but I don't know if that's an adventure, but it's definitely an unusual component of a Saturday night if you live in Brooklyn as I do. In any event, I'm not going to spend too much time here talking about all this, but I do need to mention one thing. This is not an in-person interview. Armond was going to come on the show and do a recording on Feb 24. The problem with that became we had a second blizzard in the space of a few weeks here in New York. It was the worst blizzard of the year by far. The cleanup was quite substantial, and that was all even worse out on Shelter Island, which is where Armond lives. So he was unable to get to us. So I had the thought, why don't we do the interview remotely with the hearth, as they refer to it, which is the spectacular fireplace where they do the cooking at the restaurant. It is in full view of the dining room. So we did this interview. We made, what do they say? Lemonade out of lemons. We let you see the place where Armond and his team work their magic. And I have to say also, if you are just a audio listener and you don't watch the show yet, this would be a fine episode for you to dig in and start looking at the videos. On Spotify, you can just pick watch in video or switch to video. Otherwise, you can head over to YouTube. The links for all that are in the episode description for the show. But both because we have some very good archival photographs from Armond, some professional photographs from Greg Kessler, and also the background setting of the hearth behind Armond. This is a fine episode with which to break yourself into our video offering, although it very much was edited to not lose anything if you are listening. So however you decide to partake of this, I would do it by video. But however you do it, I think you'll find it equally enjoyable. And I'm going to get right to it. Here is my conversation with the super talented, can't wait to have his food again, Armond Joseph. Here you go. Armond, thank you very much for joining us today. Great to have you on the show. Why don't you go ahead before we get going with the interview and just tell people exactly where you are and what we have behind you, because it's going to factor very much into our conversation.
I'm on Shelter Island, New York, at the restaurant I'm a chef at, Léon 1909. And behind me, we have a 15-foot wood-fired hearth.
And I should just say, I came out to the restaurant as we talked today on Wednesday, Feb 25. I guess I was there 4 days ago. I was there Saturday night for dinner. In full disclosure, I should say that I was your guys' guest, which was very nice of you.
Mm-hmm.
I was absolutely bowled over, as I've told you by email and on the phone. You know, I've had a lot of live fire is such a thing right now. I've had a lot of very good meals. Yours was definitely among the very best. Before I ask you, about your backstory and all of that, can you just tell a little about how the restaurant came into existence, how that magnificent beast behind you came into existence, and how long you've been there?
The restaurant came into existence. The owners of the restaurant are named Valerie Mnuchin, and her late father, Robert Mnuchin, passed away a couple months ago, but they always wanted to have a live fire restaurant. They loved this restaurant in the south of France that had an open fire, and they kind of wanted to recreate that on Shelter Island. I've been here since the opening. I was the opening sous chef, and I took over about a year and a half after we opened.
Well, let's get into your backstory, and then we'll get to
Cool.
this. I mean, I'm going to be curious to know how and when exactly live fire became kind of your milieu, because I looked over where you've worked and even looked up a place that you worked back in Detroit. I have to say, on paper, I didn't see any evidence. If I'm trying to analyze your resume, I
Yeah.
didn't see a lot of evidence that you would end up doing what you're doing right now. But let's just talk about you personally for a minute. So you are
Yeah.
from Detroit. Can you just talk a little bit about just what Detroit childhood looked like for you, a little about your family life, and about how food factored into that?
I grew up in a family that was in the service industry, different service. I come from three generations of hairdressers. So I grew up in a hair salon. So I've always been around hospitality and people that work with their hands. And food was always kind of central to our life. Cooking was always a part of our family dynamic. My mom is from Palestine. My grandfather on my father's side is from Germany. They're very eccentric parents. Planning the Thanksgiving menu with my father started October 1st. We were menu planning all the time for holidays, very well in advance. I didn't necessarily enjoy it as a child. It was more of, this task we had to do, but I grew to love it. But yeah, I grew up with a lot of Palestinian cooking.
A couple of things about what you just said. First of all, I've had people on the show correlate a number of things to hospitality and to cooking, right? You
Mhm.
just use the phrase working with your hands. People talk about things like, when they were kids being really into like woodworking or building things or into or cooking itself. And then a lot of people talk about growing up with an interest in hospitality, right? I have never, this is a first after almost 400 shows, I've never had anyone correlate it to a hair salon. I'm not questioning it. It makes
Yeah,
total sense to me, but
yeah.
but you use the term working with your hands. So I'm curious to know what
Mhm.
you did to help out there. And then secondly, you use the word hospitality about that, which I get, as I guess the most prominent example is the success Will Gadar has had with his book. But,
Mhm.
as we're learning, hospitality, the idea of it has applications across, I would say, almost any aspect of life. Just what do you mean when you said that, when you made that comparison?
Growing up in a high-end hair salon, even as a young child, you're always attuned to the clients. It is, my parents were always on display for their guests, and there's always transformation that's happening around you. So I think that is very closely related to cooking, where you are transforming something and you're watching a process, and sometimes there's failure in that process. And, as a child, I was very well aware, even when it came to hair color, a cut, a satisfied client, an unsatisfied client. A salon is a dining room, you know, for cutting hair. So it just was always, you always had guests.
That makes such total sense to me. Years ago, I actually wrote a little piece for when I used to do a blog, but
Mhm.
I used to say this is pre the bear, but I used to say that the best show ever about a restaurant on television was ER, that old show ER, and like the back of the back, where the emergency pods were and all that, that was the kitchen, and then out front was like the front, was like the dining room, the waiting area. That's where the hospitality was dispersed. Ideally, often not the case. I love comparisons like that. So, okay, you described the lead up to Thanksgiving in your home, that to you when you were a kid that was a chore. When did you start rounding a corner into somebody who would possibly be interested in becoming a cook, maybe even a chef? And how specifically, whether to a period of time or to an actual job or to a specific day, how closely can you pinpoint when kind of lightning struck and you said this is what I want to do with my life?
The chore was that my father was so intense about the menu planning. Cooking, it always came very naturally to me. Even from as young as 5 or 6, I would be baking and doing that on my own, very, free form. And every day after school, I'd watch Great Chefs. That was my favorite show. I didn't watch cartoons. I watched Great Chefs, Emerald, and, all of that. So that was always just kind of part of it. And everyone always told me since I was a kid, you're going to be a chef when you get older. And I hated that. I didn't want to be told what to do. So I always avoided it. It always came natural to me cooking. I mean, the earliest live fire cooking I remember is I was probably 6 or 7 years old on a summer day and wrapping potatoes in foil and making a fire pit in the backyard and cooking potatoes and trying to get the perfect cook on the potatoes. So it was always fun.
When you say wrap them in foil, did they go right in the embers?
Right in the embers. Yeah,
Yeah. So this, you do
yeah,
a version of this today, but not with
I do.
just potatoes. You do it with what, like 15 or 16 different vegetables, if I read correctly?
Yeah, there's an ember roasted vegetable dish that we do here. The dish was essentially, we worked really, really closely with a lot of smaller farmers. And oftentimes when you're working with like really small farms, they have maybe 2 pounds of something, 3 pounds of something. And in the past, I would have to say, no, I can't really do anything. It's not enough. So the dish was born out of wanting to buy these odds and ends of really, really beautiful produce. So I wouldn't have to say no to these people who are essentially my friends. And so, kind of spring and summer, especially peak season, we grill in different ways 20 to 25 different vegetables and fruits, whatever, it changes every single day. And we can use all those odds and ends. So the dish was born out of resourcefulness and wanting to buy more. So we cooked everything, in coals, depending on coals or lightly grilled, depending on the time of the year, hung on the hearth behind me.
I mean, that's so great. That to me speaks, different farmers have said some version of this sentence to me that, you know, how you shop, and this is true of, individual civilians and
Mhm.
true of restaurants and chefs, but
Yeah.
every time you buy food, you're voting, right? You're voting
Yeah.
for the food world you want to see, right? So I think it's
Mhm.
awesome that you feel that strongly about supporting some of the smaller farms, the ones that can sometimes kind of get lost between the cracks. Did you have any, when you were a kid, did you all do any gardening at home? Did you all, did you patronize, it's kind of a very common thing now for civilians to do it, but hasn't always been the most ordinary thing to go to farmers markets. Did you have any kind of relationship as a kid, either with the act of gardening slash farming, or with actual farmers markets or buying directly from farmers?
Yeah, my father is one of his passions is landscaping. So every Saturday and Sunday, weather permitting, we were outside, arranging trees in very specific patterns, growing vegetables every year. I always had my hands in the soil, and we actually, it continues to this day. I have a garden down the street at the restaurant, so it's something that has been with me since childhood, and I've always done it. And I'm married to a farmer as
Oh, that's
well.
great.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Wait, so you grow some of this stuff yourself for the restaurant?
I grow all our garnishes in the spring and summer and the fall. So it's just down the street, and I grow
That's
everything.
cool. Have you
Have I
named that
named it?
farm?
We call it we just give it the address of the house. It's Sleepy Hollow, actually. It's the name of the street it's on. So we call it Sleepy Hollow. Yeah.
Got it. Do you name check
Yeah.
that on your anywhere at the restaurant, or is that just kind of a, like an
No, it's
unsung
just kind
hero?
of it's an unsung hero. And
Okay.
it's kind of amazing because, I'll go sometimes if it's really, really peak summer. Flowers are better harvested when it's cooler in the day. So I'll just go in the middle of service and start garnishing and grab garnishes, harvest, run back to the restaurant, put it right on the plate, wash it, put it right on the plate. So it's this kind of always moving machine. It really sets the tone of where we are. And it's really awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So before you gave in to all this pressure that was being forced on you to become a chef, did you start down any kind of a different educational or career path? How long did it take before you came around, and what were you doing in the in between?
This is where it gets a little interesting. I went to school I moved to New York on my 18th birthday. I always wanted to move to New York City. I wanted to be a poet and short story writer. So I went to school for short creative writing and did that for a little while till I started selling pot in New York City and owned a delivery service when I was like 19 years old and had 17 employees and was doing that for a while. It got way too big, way
Wow.
too fast. And then I quit. I quit that. And I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do this. This is not what I intended to happen.
Can I just
So yeah,
interject that
yeah,
along with doing things with their hands and
yeah.
having good restaurant experiences, the former high school pot dealer is a very common uh, that's a very common unmentioned resume item in future chefs. And that
Yeah,
sounds like I'm being a jerk, but I'm sorry. I've interviewed so many people
I'm
who
sure.
ended up running. But the thing is, they've ended up being the chef, right? Because they were entrepreneurial, they were organized.
It's funny. The thing about that is, I ended up moving to California, and I was reflecting on this recently, And I really like to get close to the source of things, whether it's fish, vegetables, produce, hot. I want to know the process. And I ended up moving to California and really getting to know the process
So
of that.
Northern?
Yeah, San Francisco and Humboldt County. Yeah. And then I stopped smoking pot.
Well, I picked up the mantle for you.
Good. I'm glad.
I kept the equilibrium going.
Hey everybody, Andrew here. I want to encourage you to check out our presenting sponsor, Muse. Not because they're our sponsor, but because Muse exists to make your kitchen life easier. Muse is the chef-created recipe operating system for culinary professionals. What that means is that Muse is a virtual place to house all of your recipes, and just as importantly, it enables you to derive all kinds of information from them: food costs, allergen data, yield loss, unit conversions, and nutritional breakdowns, and also to scale them up or down, and even to cost them, and to do most of that at the press of a virtual button. Muse is also a teaching tool that empowers you to incorporate how-to photos and videos to illustrate individual recipe steps and techniques, which is especially useful and time-saving for multi-unit organizations. The basic version of Muse is free for the entire culinary industry. Upgrade to premium and let Muse make your entire business more efficient and centralized. Train and onboard team members, manage production, and even process invoices. Seriously, if you work with recipes in the pro kitchen or bar, Muse was built for you and will make your entire restaurant's or company's kitchen life easier. And as a listener of Andrew Talks to Chefs, receive 25 free recipe uploads and breakdowns on your new Muse account by signing up today. Learn more at getmeez, that's GetMeez.com/Andrew. Simply click through via the link on the episode description for today's show.
You just mentioned moving to New York. Unless I've done my research poorly, you did have a job, did you not, at Selden Standard in Detroit? Wasn't that your first restaurant gig?
Yeah. So I lived in New York and then I went back to Detroit for a little while to kind of recollect after I dropped out of college. And I actually was working at my parents' hair salon and my father fired me. And I walked to this restaurant next door. I asked to speak with the chef and I said, "Are you hiring any dishwashers?" And he goes, "Yeah, we are." I said, "Okay, I'm ready to become a chef now." And I started washing dishes.
I just want to make sure I'm not over dramatizing this in my head. You went right from getting fired by your dad. You walked out that same few minutes and went to the restaurant.
It was a moment where I'm like, I need to do something with my life. And I've been contemplating it. I'm like, I can either become a hairdresser or I'm going to become a chef. My father fired me for good reason, for cause. I would have fired me as well. And I walked right into that restaurant and I've been in kitchens ever since. So,
Amazing.
He thought, I was talking to my father and he's like, "I thought you were going to come back in 3 days and you haven't been back since." And so I never went back.
How was your dishwasher experience? It's one of the jobs that fascinates me so much. If somebody would buy it, I would do a book about dishwashers because, it's the most common point of entry. I say it on the show sometimes. I don't know how many people out there, people in the industry know it. I don't know how many people outside the industry know that a lot of certainly the best chefs in the United States, their kitchen life started when they wandered in one day looking to make some extra money in high school and they started washing dishes. For a lot of people, that was the point of entry.
Oh, I had so much fun. I loved it. The energy, the first time being in a professional kitchen, the energy of it, the speed of it. And this was at a small local restaurant by my house before I worked at Selden Standard. But, I remember just washing dishes. And then, my goal was to become a cook. I knew that walking in the door, and I think that makes a difference. Like I knew that I wanted to touch food, so slowly they let me start peeling shrimp and cleaning leeks and, cutting onions. But I just tried to work as fast and as hard as possible because there was other dishwashers. So it was always a competition in my head. I had to clean the shrimp twice as fast as them. But I loved washing dishes. I loved, the sound of the water, the sound of the clacking. It was so exciting. It was new. I kind of felt home.
One of the things about dishwashing to me, and chefs will tell you this as well, in some respects, there are other people on the team you might say this of, but in some respects, dishwashers to me have a role that's comparable to the drummer in a band. If the dish pit goes down, right? If the rhythm of the dish pit is compromised, food can't go out. If the dishwasher isn't keeping pace, that can shut the whole thing down. Did you perceive that as directly as I'm saying it when you were doing it? And did you embrace that pressure?
Yes, is the short answer. I've always felt like it's the backbone of the restaurant. If the dishes are clear, and my philosophy was you could always help a cook. You could always help a prep cook. You could always do a little bit more if you kind of handle your side of the street. Someone always needs something.
When you start, how did you put it, touching food? Did you find that the cooking you had done at home, because it sounds like you did a fair bit of it, like the way you were cutting an onion, the way you were peeling things, the way you would whatever, did you find that you had a pretty good, starting at a pretty good place to jump into a kitchen when the time finally came that you were allowed to do that?
Yeah, I was in a really good place, and I ended up I bought a bunch of potatoes and onions the second they started letting me touch food, and I just practiced at home practiced all my little knife cuts from Brunoise to Julienne, but I was in a pretty good place where it only took me a couple weeks to get up to speed. I was very slow, I imagine. But yeah, I had a really good foundation and a really good understanding. I was a really good eater at that point. I was a good diner at that point as well. So I had a pretty wide, experience in eating itself. So it was nothing was foreign to me.
So you had a real holistic sense of the whole dining experience, not just what goes on in the kitchen.
Yeah.
When you went to Selden Standard, was that a significant stop on your way? Was that to sort of confirm, your ambitions? Just what was that time about for you?
I was cooking at this small restaurant locally, and someone I was talking to said, "Oh my God, this amazing restaurant opened up called Selden Standard." And I kept on hearing about it. And it was known as the best restaurant. I think it still has the best reputation in Detroit to this day. And I had already been cooking on the line. And I said, "Oh, I have to work there. Like I got to work at the best place." So I walked in, asked for a line cook job. They said, "Absolutely not." So I said, "Great, I'll wash dishes." So I started washing dishes again, and I brought my knife roll every day until they started letting me touch food. And Andy Holliday, the chef there, chef owner, he gave me a foundation for everything that I cook today. I owe him a lot. Yeah, he's incredible.
How did you know to start bringing your knife roll? That's such a smart move.
It was instinct. It was like, well, they won't let me cook, but I'm going to have it ready just in case they need anything. And one day, lo and behold, someone doesn't show up, and you seize your opportunity. It's always, I've always found it to be strategic.
I'm assuming you didn't make any secret of the fact you had it with you. Like, I'm assuming you made sure. Am I right? I would think.
I said it right. I said it right in the dish tank, just so they knew. They'd be like, they would laugh. They'd be like, "This guy's bringing his knives. There's no chance."
Right.
But I kept on bringing it, and eventually, I ended up working there for 2.5 years. So that gave me and that's the first place that I worked on live fire. They had a small hearth and a wood burning oven.
How much stuff did they do? Like what? Just roughly, like what percentage of the menu was cooked that way?
I'd say about 40%, 30 to 40%.
Yeah,
so there was kind of a cold pasta kitchen, and then everything came out of either a wood oven or a wood-fired grill. It's kind of like this setup that we have at the restaurant, where it is in the dining room as well, and there's actually just guests can eat at the counter there. So I was working on fire in front of guests, at one of my first jobs. So this setup here, wasn't too foreign to me at all. It was actually kind of how I just started working.
About what year were you there?
2011.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So
2012 maybe.
And were you drawn to, did you feel that live fire was something you might want to pursue in a more dedicated way at some point, or was it just part of the repertoire there and you just enjoyed it but
See,
didn't particularly focus on it?
it was always, I always, I loved the flavor of it. That was first and foremost. And I always, to me, it was just kind of the most natural flavor that you could achieve. And I like the action of it as well. So it was always, I have yet to open up my own restaurant, but it's always been something that, to me, it's just like having an oven. It's just a tool in the tool belt that you should just have. It comes really natural to me.
I'd love to ask you this. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but
Hmm.
I do know that you do some preserving there at the restaurant, some curing. Um,
Hmm.
uh, you know, you said 2011. Uh, there was this moment in time not that long ago that coincides with the time you were doing this, which was, this. I still and will always believe that it was a handful of kind of newish techniques and additives that was mistaken for a movement. But this was right in the middle of the whole molecular moment, right?
Hmm.
Which to me ran roughly from 2005 to about 2015.
Hmm.
And I've always thought it was no accident that all of these things that are of the moment now and have been for a few years followed right after that. The live fire explosion came right after that. The
Hmm.
fermentation explosion came right after that.
It's great.
Um, it's like for the longest time, you could follow the different trends in food and the different evolutions, and it all seemed like it was headed towards something. And then I feel like this, whatever, whether or not it was a movement or not, but I feel like that molecular moment kind of broke the timeline, and people went like all the way back to not well, fire is almost prehistoric, but some of these other techniques that predate French cuisine, that go the way we think of it. Did you at all uh, did you at all respond to something like live fire? Do you think, um, in that context, do you think that the way things were kind of headed at that time made live fire at all more attractive?
I don't think so because, to be honest, if I probably would have jumped on the molecular, train if I, had the opportunity, and it still fascinates me, and I'm still, I still study it, and I'm so curious. Our general manager at the restaurant, worked at WD-50 for 8 years.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so it's a conversation piece, at all times. It's just it never was on my trajectory, unfortunately. So I don't think it was a response, but I think a lot of, my time coming up. I mean, you had, obviously the Nomas and the Favicans of the world that were very influential to a young cook at the time, but there was a chef that really influenced me into kind of this preserving and method, and that's up Ben Sukal up in Providence, Rhode Island. I worked for him for about a year. He had this little restaurant called Birch. He has Oberlin and Gift Horse right now, which are fantastic restaurants. But at Birch, everything was from Rhode Island, which is the smallest state in the union. So we really, as a cook there, we had to preserve everything because winter was coming, and that was just kind of what we did there, is always getting ahead for a few months later. So I want to speak for him, but we never got bored with our pantry, even in February.
Let's talk about your years in New York City. You worked,
Hmm.
I'm not sure how long at each one, but you worked at Wild Air,
Yeah.
Del Posto,
Yeah.
and Romans, which is walking distance from where I'm talking to you from.
Oh, really?
Um, yeah, I'm in downtown Brooklyn, and that's Fort
Okay.
Greene. So yeah, I just actually walked over there for lunch 2 Saturdays ago.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
yeah, but what was the sequence of these restaurants? And I always like to say that I think an aspiring chef kind of charts their own curriculum through their jobs.
Mhm.
If you could take me through the progression of restaurants in New York and what was kind of driving your decision to go to each one of those places.
Del Posto was my first job in New York City. And I was reaching out I just moved back to New York from Detroit. I was ready to move on. pursue cooking further. And, I sent out a million emails to try and get, trails. And uh, I only trailed at three places initially was Prune, La Bernardin, and Del Posto, which is just, all over the place. And the hiring manager at Del Posto happened to have eaten at Selden Standard in Detroit the week prior and had a fantastic meal. So they reached right out to me. So I worked at Del Posto first I actually started on Mark Ladner's last week.
I was just going to ask if you worked
Yeah.
for Mark or if you worked for Melissa Rodriguez there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I was one of Melissa's first hires, under her new regime. Obviously, she had a full staff. I worked dinner there for a while, and then I ended up moving to lunches where I actually learned the most I think you're doing a lot of bulk prep and really learning how to make sauces and things like that. See, I left El Posto after about a year. I left because I got a stage opportunity at Blanca. So I went to go, and I always loved Blanca. That was like my dream job in New York. And finally, they had a 3-week stage opening, so I left El Posto to go stage there, and I staged there for 3 weeks, and that was incredible. It was only 3 weeks, but it was very influential to me.
I mean, everything over in that compound is so important. I mean, when people write history books about the last 20 years,
Yeah.
that's all going in.
I was cooking, at Selden Standard, which is kind of a new American, Italian leaning. It's Del Posto, which is obviously Italian, and I was like really into Italian food at the time. But I always wanted to kind of jump in that world. But I kind of was writing my own curriculum, and I really my mind was kind of blown when I was there. I was like, oh, this is what I've been looking for. What they were doing is fermentation at the time, dry aging it, and even in their garden, my job was to pick herbs all day, and I'd learned about 15 new herbs that I'd never heard of, and I remember walking back to Galen, who was the chef at the time, and what is this herb? And it's things now that I grow in my own garden. But so it was a shock to my system, and I said, oh, this is what I'm craving right now. And it's not Italian food, but I ended up at Romans.
Okay, so for people who don't know, Romans is one of Andrew Tarlow's restaurants.
Mhm.
Andrew, I don't know if prolific is the right word, but a very successful restaurateur. He does quite a bit in the Italian area. He finally crossed the river into Manhattan in the last year or so and opened a restaurant that's gotten a lot of press called Borgo. We actually have an interview that we just recorded with Jordan, who's the chef there.
Oh.
So that's who Andrew Tarlow is. But that's what would we say? That's kind of a rustic Italian restaurant in Brooklyn.
At the time, it was ran by who is now a close friend of mine, a chef named Dave Gould, who I was just with in the city last week. And I've never met someone to this day that has a better palate than him. And I was going there as a diner for a long. I always actually wanted to work at Romans. I loved eating at Romans, and I had actually staged there. And I remember he wouldn't give me a job. He wouldn't give me a job. And I kept on going back to dinner. I kept on emailing him, kind of being a pest. I really, really wanted to work there. And eventually, he emailed me back, and we joke about it to this day. He's like, I appreciate your persistence. Can you come in on Tuesday? And I'm like, great, I'll be there. So I've kind of been a pest for a long time, it seems. But yeah, the menu changed under Dave. Sometimes full menu change every day.
Mm-hmm.
There was moments when we changed the menu twice in a service, which wasn't awesome. But the foundation of cooking up like on the fly there was incredible.
A quick note of thanks to one of our promotional partners, S.Pellegrino Sparkling Natural Mineral Water. For the past 125 years, S.Pellegrino has supported the art of fine dining in all of its ever-changing forms and nurtured the next generation of chefs through resources and mentorship. To learn more, visit sanpellegrino.com.
It's interesting to me. We haven't talked about Wild Air yet, but one of the things that really struck me, and I'll have interspersed some photographs of your food in the restaurant into this interview, but even some of the quote unquote main courses, right? Like your chicken, the plating is so, and I mean this is the highest compliment. It's so straightforward and simple. in that way, I think it's quite beautiful. It's also it really grabs your attention when it shows up. I mean, the chicken in particular, the guy who I was there with, it came out and I said, look at that. He goes, so simple. I go, unbelievable. I mean, but it eats complex. But what I was about to say is, what you do is not Italian, but I feel like there are several qualities of Italian food that I do think must have helped shape your style. I mean, Italian food to me, and I'm not saying either one is better, but the food is put through, generally speaking, way less transformative steps. The product itself is, more in a more pure form than it tends to be by the time you're done with cooking it, in French cuisine or in other cuisines. Early in this show, we had Massimo Bottura on, and we were talking about this, and he said, the four great cuisines are, and he grouped them, right? He said Chinese and French. He grouped those two. And then he said Japanese and Italian, right? Which he saw as kindred spirits, right?
Yeah.
And it was for all these things I'm saying. But does that resonate with you, that comment? Because it does seem to me that your food it's not Italian in format, right? Or in dish structure, but there is some of that spirit to me in what you do and the confidence of simplicity, right? Which I think is something not everybody has.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, what I learned cooking in Italian, especially at Romans, was, ingredients, 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 and kind of like don't fuck with things that don't need to be fucked with. Sometimes you need to, but if you have like a big sweet potato, like you can be confident in that. Especially if you know where it's coming from, how it's grown, and who grew it, who picked it. I have a lot of confidence in our sourcing here, where I pretty much know a little harder in the winter, but definitely spring, summer, and fall. Like I usually know who's, growing it, harvesting it, where exactly it's coming from, sometimes down to the field. So that's the advantage of being on Long Island is, it's very personal. So it does resonate with me where it's, you have a vegetable can be incredible. You don't have to manipulate it too much.
All right. So the other stop in New York, how do you get to Wild Air?
Being Dave Gould, the chef of Romans, ended up leaving. And at this point, I was really bored with Italian food. I didn't want to cook it anymore. I did not want to cook Italian food. And I'm still resistant to cooking it. You're having pasta on the menu. I dove so deep into it where I kind of just like, I need something completely different. And a friend of mine had just gotten a job at Contra. And he said, just come, trail. Yeah, sure. Like I'd never even been to Wilder, hadn't even heard of it. And so I ended up loving it. I trailed at Wilder. I had so much fun. It was so much fun. And the food was incredible. And it was like a shock of life. It was almost like that Blanco experience. It's like, okay, like this is a whole new, world to learn and completely different techniques. I was there for about a year and I loved it.
Yeah, I thought the early years at Wild Air were so exciting and like you said, so fun.
Yeah.
And you guys were on another situation where you were on full display. I mean,
full display.
I mean, it's a fully visible kitchen. It's not necessarily what I would call a true open kitchen, but it's open enough.
It's open enough where you got to keep your towels really folded. Yeah.
Yeah, but that was, those guys, it's so funny the way time flies by, but that was Jeremiah and Fabian, who are the chef owners of those two restaurants. I mean, they really, Contra was for what it offered, a very inexpensive 5-course tasting menu with a couple of supplements available. I think when they first opened, it was like $55 or $65, and then Wild Air very much, I don't know what term they would put to it. I think of the whole like gastronomy thing, in France with that was, I think, the first place where I sat down at a restaurant that had the little drawer, in the table with the silverware, this they brought a lot of that stuff over and also a lot of the sort of plating style, I think, that was catching on, like in places like Copenhagen. Really, it was fun. That place. And Jorge Riera, who's now with the Frenchette guys, was walking around pouring the wine. How do you end up finding your way out to Shelter Island?
I was really interested in leaving New York again. And I had been following that restaurant Birch up in Providence because it was this kind of progressive American coastal cuisine. And I wanted to get closer to the source. It was really into seafood, really, really into seafood, still am to this day. Been looking at the OAD list and I kept on seeing this restaurant, Birch. What is this Birch place? And I was just following it for like a year. And finally I asked Fabian, I said, have you heard of this restaurant Birch? And he's like, yeah, I was at Noma with Ben. And I'm like, "Ah." So he ended up getting me a stage there. So on one of our breaks, I went and staged there, and I had just met what is now my wife, and I ended up getting a job at Birch, and we moved to Rhode Island. 4 weeks later, I said, "You want to move to Rhode Island?" She said, "Yeah, sure." So we ended up moving up to Rhode Island and working there, and I was running their garden there as well. And then my wife got a job on Shelter Island as a farmer, running a nonprofit farm here. So I ended up actually going back to the city and becoming the sous chef of Romans, and then the chef of Achilles Heel, which just closed. Andrew mentored me a lot and gave me a lot of opportunity. And then after I left Achilles Heel, I didn't know where I wanted to be really. My future wife was out here, didn't want to be in the city, and Andrew Tarlow actually consulted on this restaurant. So Andrew called me and he's like, "You want to work on Shelter Island?" I'm like, "I'll check it out." And I've been here for 5 years.
I have to say, I'm very struck by how sort of malleable you are. A lot of people, they get to New York and they're like, I'm never leaving New York, or they go to a place like California and they're like, I'm home, or maybe Rhode Island. You seem like a very kind of like go with the flow person. Is that
Yeah.
an accurate statement?
Yeah, I'm pretty laid back. I mean, not like in the heat of the moment in the kitchen, but I'm mostly, kind of trust my instinct a lot and kind of, let it guide me.
You flow. You
I
flow.
flow. I flow.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
definitely flow.
Yeah. I totally get that. I think that's such an
Yeah.
unusual thing, not to stereotype, but in a chef. I'm so used to people who are like, they finally
Really
find what they
nurtured.
think is it and they like plant the flag. And I'm not
Hmm.
criticizing that. I just think that's the more ordinary thing. But I'm really
Yeah.
struck at how you've managed to go to all these, dramatically different places. So something that I read that you said, and I'd love for you to just expand on it if you don't mind. And I
Hmm.
actually just had this talk. Jeremy Fox was on the show at the end of last year because his meat book had
Hmm.
come out. I have always felt that, and I saw something where you said almost the exact same thing as I was getting ready to talk to you, that there are restaurants that are of the place and time where they are, and then there are restaurants that very deliberately want to transport you, right?
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
Whether through some kind of an abstract theme or a particular country, or culture.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel like California restaurants, by and large, this is to me one of the few things that Northern and Southern California have in common when it comes to food and restaurants. California's, generally speaking, those restaurants out there are not all that interested in transporting you. It's like this: you're in California, you can see it out the window. This food is all from around here, and that's what we're about, and we don't need to do the whole, song and dance. And I read where you said there are some restaurants that try to transport you, and then there are restaurants that are kind of their place, and that you're kind of committed to being of your place, right? And where you are in the season and or in the year, and what's available from the farms around you, and so on. Can you just speak to this notion? Because I felt very seen when I read that quote from you.
I think I get really frustrated with this. On Eastern Long Island, there's not a great reputation of dining culture out here. It's a seasonal place. It's really hard to run a business out here. And I always get really frustrated when it's like you have to be something else when where we are is really great. Whether we have to advertise that we're an Italian restaurant or a French restaurant. And when we have all of the things that make all of the great cuisines what they are, whether it be Japanese, Italian, Chinese, it's of the place. And I think when we started this restaurant, when I was the sous chef, a lot was trying to be an Italian, French restaurant. And as I've taken over, it's kind of evolved. And so I really want to, you know, find the heartbeat of the East End, but even more specifically Shelter Island. And, what does this island taste like? What does the East End taste like? And so that's been my mission here, every single day is finding, and we do it through fire, is, finding ingredients, whether we, go out foraging or preserving something or using, a lot of, underutilized species of fish and things like that. But I really want to find what is the flavor of Eastern Long Island? Like, what is Eastern Long Island cuisine? Is it chicken parm or is it something else? We have all these incredible ingredients. So, I never worked at a restaurant this long. And I think this is the carrot that keeps me going is, I do feel really comfortable in this part of the world on the east end of Long Island, but it's because there's big questions to cook through.
The poet is still alive in there,
It's in
Armand.
there
There
somewhere.
are big questions to cook through. I'm assuming when you say, what does it taste? What does Shelter Island taste like, right? Would I be on solid ground to assume that that is an ever evolving, ever expanding notion for you? I have to think that's something that probably changes certainly with every annual cycle and what might come through and what people might be growing or a catch that maybe is a little better this year than last year. But is that constantly in flux for you?
Yeah, it's a little slower in the winter where it's a little less change, but as it picks up, I mean, the menu changes every single day, in some capacity. So it's always evolving, much to my, cook's dismay sometimes, but it's always evolving and it's always, sometimes we go back to go forward. Sometimes, we just completely, move forward and I never really, it's always kind of, charting its new course to try and figure out, what is this out here? And that's the beauty of using as much as we can from around here.
Did you have much of a learning curve with that? What do we even call? We just call it a fireplace, a
We just
hearth.
call it the
What do you?
hearth.
Yeah,
I
the
gotta
hearth.
I gotta
Yeah.
put a log
Did
on
you have
it.
Did you have much of a learning curve with that, or were you pretty much having spent some time at Birch and some of these other jobs you mentioned, and even doing some of this in childhood? Was even the size and scale of that thing something that was relatively turnkey for you in terms of how to use
I
it?
wouldn't say it's turnkey. I think I'm still learning every day on this thing, and we try new things all the time on here. So I wouldn't say it's turnkey. I think it's we're always learning, trying new things on here, and you know, no, I wouldn't say it's definitely not turnkey. This is a beast. It's
Okay.
the hardest station I've ever worked.
Okay.
It's brutal in the summer. It's brutal.
That's something I
Yeah,
was wondering the other night. I was like,
yeah.
because you gave us a very nice
It's
table right by the
yeah.
kitchen, and I was like, this
Mhm.
is great tonight. I was like, I wonder how this would be in August.
It's funny. All my cooks uh, have only ever worked here.
Oh wow.
All of my cooks started as dishwashers here, and all my cooks can work every station. They've been with me since day one. Um, so to them, this is normal. So, this is the kitchen. They don't realize there's more comfortable places to cook. I hope they don't listen to this and ditch me. But so it's brutal. It's a sport more so than anything, especially in the summer. Yeah, it's
Um,
athletic.
I was going to ask, you just kind of anticipated it, what it's like, because I've had this conversation mostly with some contemporary pizzaiolos
Mhm.
um, who work with live fire. But I mean, you just said these two. How many guys do you have? There were two guys with you the other night, at least visibly.
Yeah, um, four, four all day.
Four. What? How tough is it to impart the knowledge of how to use a hearth like that? I mean, it's so, and I'm speaking just as a really as a layperson because I've interviewed people about it, but I'm okay with a Weber grill, but I wouldn't know where to begin with this thing you've got. But I have to think that there's a lot of teaching. You just used the term it's athletic. I have to think there's a lot of almost coaching in terms of how to read situations. When do you put more wood on the fire? Where's the right spot to put this preparation? Where's the right spot to put this protein?
Mhm.
All of these things. how tough is it to convey that to a team and get people on the same page about, it's not like you just set something to a temperature and pop something in the oven and, check on it 10 minutes later. It's not that simple.
Some of the best success I've had with training people and imparting this knowledge is if they don't have that much cooking experience, where this is almost their first, this is, their intuition is kind of fresh. That's not to say an experienced cook can't work on this. I just find it's easier to coach when people don't have preconceived notions of how to cook on this thing. It's a lot of watching. It's a lot of burning. It's a lot of burning your food. Where your hot spots are, where your cold spots are, because you have to be the one creating them. So it's really hard to teach intuition. It's a lot of repetition. But the thing is, the menu changes all the time. So they really, whether they're skewering something or slowly smoking something, or we're going really hot, or we're going right on the embers, or we're in baskets, or we're going to be resting here, or, for this cut of meat, we're going to be resting up here. It's, the cooks do become really versatile, and where you can kind of, show them. And it takes some time, even for like a new protein, to understand it, to cook it properly, and to find the right, even for me, I don't get it on the first try. It's, it takes time to, whether the tile fish, how long do we need to temper the tile fish, whether it's a monk fish, are we going to go on the grates, off the grates? It's really hard. It's complicated. It's really complicated. It's actually, I've never actually had to articulate it. It's very hard to articulate.
Yeah.
But intuition, I guess, would be the, the overriding, you have to have that gut sense where like, that's done. It's cooking.
Yeah. Can you, I have two questions about the farm relationships, and then I would just love if you could just, give us a quick little, you can do it from your chair, but a quick little tour of that hearth. One thing is something that, well, it's quietly happened for decades now, but I feel like we hear a lot more about it now. There's certain restaurants that have exclusive relationships with farms, like Manresa, David Kinch used to have with Love Apple Farm, and One White Street, is owned by the same people that own the farm that supplies most of their stuff. I'm wondering how symbiotic, I guess, the relationship is between you and your farmer, because something that I feel happens a lot more now than it used to is that chefs might ask farmers to grow something for them that maybe they weren't growing, or to harvest it a little bit sooner or later than maybe the farmer would do left to their own devices, or to grow it larger or smaller than they might naturally, these sorts of things. Do you have dialogues that fall along any of those lines?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I talk to the farmers maybe in the spring and summer almost every day, seeing what's coming up, whether I want something unripe, more ripe, less ripe. It's always changing. It's always in flux. This is the time of the year when I usually meet. Actually, it's more in December. I usually meet with the farms. Not all, but most. And we kind of see what I like this year. Is there anything I want special grown? Why this didn't work, why this did work, where we, had pitfalls. And, there is a commitment. If you ask someone to grow something for you, you better use it. It's a lot of effort. So Trieber Farms on the North Fork, they'll grow things for us specifically. We just had this one farmer, his name was Ron in Orient Point, and he just retired actually, but he was growing saffron, not exclusively for us, but we bought as much as we could, which is pretty incredible to have local saffron. And, dry beans, he started bulking up on dry beans because he knew we'd use them all winter, and his beans are the best. But, it's always a conversation. It's like kind of a year-round thing. Yeah.
For people who wondered why you have those conversations in December, and I'm speaking from limited knowledge here, so please tell me if I'm wrong, but my assumption is that that's because people very often start germinating and growing things, in pods, like in a hoop house or a greenhouse or a hothouse, and then transfer them actually into the land come the springtime. So like there's stuff that's right around now. Certain farms are starting to grow them. Is that accurate?
Yeah, when you have to order your seeds as well, I think that's a whole, just from having been married to a farmer, that's a whole gamut where you really have to get ahead of it. They sell out. So you really have to, put your seed order in and make sure you get the seeds that you want. And, some farms, they like to be very early. Some farms like to be, later, like Balsam Farms and Imogans, that they're very early on things. They still have a lot of produce this time of the year, even. A lot of storage vegetables that we use, from then. But yeah, decide even November, December, and then we'll start seeing some greenhouse stuff hopefully soon.
And then my other question was, as I understand it, you do some preserving yourself in various forms. So it's not just the farmers that you talk to, in December. There's a point in the year, I don't know when it is. I assume it's spring, summer, maybe it's ongoing, where you're making decisions about what you want to preserve and in what fashion, that you might, deploy later in the year. Can you give an example or two of things that you've done? And I'm curious to know whether or not when you make those decisions, if you know yet how you're going to use these things, like, what they're going to go with. You're laughing as I ask this. People can only see me right now, but I'm wondering if you have some sense, any sense, no sense of what context these things are going to end up on the plate with.
I don't have a plan for it usually. I know exactly how I want to preserve things, but I don't have a plan. I know that I'm going to use it. And it's often dictated by if a farmer has a lot of something. Like Trieber had 200 pounds of these like perfect plums that is going with our steak dish. So we preserve those in a few different ways, into a plum butter, plum vinegar, plum shio koji, and that all goes into, I knew I wanted to use it all in one dish. I just didn't know, how it would evolve. Things like canning fruit and preserving fruit, that is just, mostly for dessert menu and things like that. Other than that, no, I don't. I'd like to have, kind of the palette, to be able to kind of play with what I want to. And every year I kind of chisel away. It's like, do I need 100 pounds of green strawberries? I don't, anymore. It's just not, I do things because I think I want them and then I end up not really wanting them. So next year I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that again. And every year it just kind of gets a little more, refined into what I actually want to use and
Yeah.
what works and what doesn't work.
Okay, thank you for that. Can you, if you don't, you can just do it from your chair because I think we'll lose
Yeah.
your angle otherwise. And I deliberately saved this for the end because we're available both audio only and video. So this audio listeners may want to stay on, or they may not be able to understand what you're about to show us. But for people who have checked us out with video, you can just point around, but can you just tell us how the various parts of the stove or the hearth are utilized?
So on the far right side, we use it for slow smoking during service, smoldering, hanging chickens there, large format meats mostly. And then, here we'll go very, very high heat. And that's where we'll kind of do steaks, things like that. But the central fire here is we always keep a giant fire lit, and that's where we're building our charcoal from. So we're building charcoal, it's falling down, and that's what we're actually cooking with. The only time we're cooking with logs is if we're smoldering a log, with chicken. And then behind me here, we treat this kind of as a quick grill saute zone. And then the left side is all fish, whether it's skewered fish that's wrapped in something, shellfish. It's all the seafood.
And how about the top shelf behind you, right behind you?
Resting?
Yeah.
Storage. Like we'll get color on something, we'll pop it up there. We'll keep sauces warm up here. Depending on what's on the menu, we'll hang. You'll see there's bars up here. You probably can't see them in the camera, but there's bars that go across the whole hearth. So, we'll dry things out here. We'll smoke them. We'll do, smoked chili peppers or something like that. If we have a bunch, and it's like a big party up here. So, we try and utilize the whole thing.
I have to, again, I can't speak from my own cooking experience, but the way you're talking, the way you talked about the people who work for you and, in the kitchen, I have to think the line that I was just reminded of as you were talking was, There used to be a painter named Chuck Close. Actually ended up, I think, I don't know, quadriplegic, I think ultimately, and kept painting. Like, I think they would put a brush in his hand, and he figured out a way to keep going. But the stuff he did, I read an interview with him once, and he said, I don't know how to explain it. I just know how the paint is going to land, because some of it was a little abstract. And it seems to me that to get to the place that you and your team need to be, I feel like you kind of have to know how the heat's going to land. You know what it seems to me like the way you just took me through the various parts of that hearth, it seems to me like at some point you are able to make decisions and do things. It's just that you've done this enough that more or less, obviously there's going to be adjusting, but that you know where to put what to make a certain effect happen. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's completely accurate. Yeah, it's
and that's just from experience, right? There's no
just
there's
from
no shortcut to that.
experience, and it's not just me. I have to give a lot of credit to my cooks.
Sure.
Because of course I show them how I want something done one way, and they teach me too. They're like, that's not going to work in service. You're crazy. It's going to take too long. I'm like, oh, okay, then what would you do? And they'll show me a really efficient way of doing something that's, better than so I have to give a lot of credit. It's, they are here all the time. As a chef, I'm pulled away. So I do have to give a lot of, it is cool in that sense, kitchen wise, because, I have to tap into their intuition and what they've learned. And it is kind of symbiotic. Of course, as the chef, it's my final call, but I do lean heavily on their experience. It wouldn't be right for me to, discredit the heat that they've taken on this thing and what they've learned. So I learn as much from them about this specific tool than any book or anything that can teach me. It's their hard work, and that really teaches me a lot too.
Well, I'm going to leave it there. I can't say it enough. I'm not just saying it because you guys were nice enough to have me in. I'm not just saying it because you're a guest. I told you on the phone when we spoke the other day and realized you weren't, when we were trying to figure out if we could record in person, I'm already plotting a return. I realized after we spoke that I was speaking in Michelin terms, like worth a special trip, because I drove about 2.5 hours each way the same night, and I would do it again tomorrow. It was just awesome. I think what you're doing there is exciting. I think it's delicious. I'm glad we met. You seem like an unbelievably nice, chill guy. So thank you, and thanks for rolling with the punches and doing this remotely as we did.
I really appreciate you. Thank you.
And that is our show for today. Again, our great thanks to Armond Joseph for joining us. If you live anywhere near Shelter Island or find yourself visiting, make sure to check out Léon 1909. I recommend it highly. Andrew Talks to Chefs is produced by Table 12 Productions Incorporated. This episode was recorded, edited, and mixed by me, Andrew Friedman, and produced by Alleyne. Please go check out Muse, the recipe operating system for culinary professionals, at getmuse.com/Andrew. And our thanks, as always, to S.Pellegrino for their longstanding support of the pod. If you'd like to support us, we ask that you do that by telling a friend about the show, posting about the show on social media, and or rating and or reviewing us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you are now watching us on YouTube, please be sure to like and subscribe. Our thanks, as always, to After School Special for our music. Please check out their album Double Barrel, Single Entendre on iTunes. Please follow us on Instagram, and also, as of this episode, on TikTok, @ChefPodcast is the handle on both platforms. Thank you for listening, and we will be back soon with another episode of Andrew Talks to Chefs.